Oh, I got a book. I got a book, The Vampire. It was found very big Warring States in Seattle. Hi, so nice to see you. How did you know? I've been searching for because it was on top of a photocopier, and I knew because you're a good person. I knew you would be. Okay. We're now live. Okay, we're live. Is there anyone online? Yes, no. There are. Yeah. Oh, there are. Oh, I can see them, but they're right. Oh. Yeah. Would you like to play with more about it? No, I think you should. Yeah. What do you have? Yeah. We'll talk later. Shall we? Okay, good. We're going to start. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the last development lecture, last for this term. There is going to be another 3 lectures, I understand, for next term, which will be advertised in due course. So, as you know, the Sussex Development Lectures bring together, let me read what I've been told to read, leading global thinkers on development. And they are organized jointly by the School of Global Studies, the Institute of Development Studies, the Science and Policy Research Unit, SPRU, and the Center for International Education. There will be plenty of time after the lecture to ask questions. Those of you who are online, you'll be able to ask questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, if I understand correctly. And also there is a closed captions facility available on Zoom. I'm Filippo Zella from Global Studies, and I'll be your host for the lecture, and with great pleasure, I'll introduce to you Dr. Santhosh from the IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, which actually is in Chennai. Dr. Santhosh is a sociologist, stroke anthropologist who has been working for a number of years on issues connecting to religion and religiosity in South India, in particular with reference to Muslim communities in Kerala. He has researched various aspects of religion and religiosity, not only in relations to different positions and different debates within Muslim communities in Kerala, also relationship between communities, different religious communities in the states, addressing also, of course, a relationship between Islamic religiosity, relationship to the states, and ideas of development, which Santhosh will be addressing today in his lecture. Today's lecture, indeed, is entitled Religious Communities, Nation States and Development Insights from South India. Yeah. So, Dr. Santhosh, yeah. I mute myself and I leave it to you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Filippo, for this introduction. And let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Ideas Sussex for giving this opportunity. I consider it as an honor and a privilege to make use of this platform to talk with you. So this talk is also contributed by my collaborator, Dr. Vishak. Vishak was a postdoctoral fellow affiliated with the School of Global Studies at the Sussex University. So thanks to him as well. So I have titled my presentation as Religious Communities, Nation State and Development, Insights from South India. And this is a very broad title. And as my abstract indicates, I will be going into more specificities of a particular community to a more kind of well-defined socio-historic and political context. So the kind of a larger background in which I place this talk, it is the critique of secularization thesis of economy and its Eurocentrism. As we know that the classical secularization thesis presupposed a unilinear movement towards rationality. Modernity was defined as a march towards rationality, and human action was seen as increasingly defined by rationality. And that thesis has been debunked, has been criticized extensively. And a part of that thesis also had an understanding about economic activity as being purely rational, or it's being increasingly disembedded from its socio-cultural milieu. And the scholarship has been extensively critical of that particular position and has argued that economic activity is no longer has never been completely a kind of a rational action, and it has always been influenced by a host of other cultural, social, and other aspects. And this thesis also has been criticized for its Eurocentrism, for its very limited understanding about what constitutes religion, what constitutes social, what constitutes economy. So this is one of the larger backdrops of this particular topic. And the second one is the kind of the salience of religious communities or caste communities or ethnic communities and their relevance in charting out different imaginations about development and then having an engagement with the developmental kind of a state. And that we have, again, has been studied extensively. We have a lot of evidences and studies from across the globe about how there are competing developmental imaginations informed by specific socio-cultural or religious sensibilities and ideas. And there has always also been influences on intra-religious specificities or kind of very specific theological orientations or theological strands. And let us not forget the monumental work by Max Weber. He was talking about a peculiar, Protestant orientation towards and its connection with capitalism. And finally, the kind of a larger or a very fascinating set of emerging literature that looks at the mutual constitution of religious identities and neoliberal economy in a globalized world. So there have been quite a lot of work that are emerging which talks about the reciprocal relationship between religion and economy. It's not a causative one, it's not a unidirectional one, but how both economy and religion are constituting or shaping each other in different kind of context. And I'm talking about a more specific context. I'm talking about the Muslim community in Kerala, and I'm talking about the specific socio-political context of Kerala as a state. Kerala is the southwesternmost state of India. So this specificity, I believe, is something very important when you talk about a particular religious community and its engagement with state or neoliberal economy, because its historic, socio-cultural, and political specificities are highly important. And I'm talking about the fascinating transformation of a minority community seen as traditional and backward. And when I make this statement, let me clarify at the very outset that I will be using this term Sunni traditionalism. And Sunni traditionalism in this context is used to indicate almost every Muslims in Kerala, because Kerala has no Shias. Every Muslim in Kerala is a Sunni. And the term traditional is used to indicate the Sunni believers as opposed to the reformists who are otherwise seen as the Salafi, the Salafi groups, or people who belong to Jamaat Islami. So Jamaat Islami and Salafi groups are seen as reformists, whereas the traditional Sunnis are seen as the traditional people. So that terminology is something very peculiar to or more specific to Kerala context. So I will also be spending some time looking into very interesting refashioning of religious identity by theological reinvention and new forms of authentication. Because I believe this particular transformation about how a new forms of authentication, a new form of authentication has been brought about in redefining what constitutes traditionalism in a theological manner is something very important, and it's a part of this larger story of their engagement with development, and I believe that is important. And sorry, a unique negotiation with the neoliberal economy and the nation state, and the developmental imaginations of neo-traditionalism and its fault lines. I will be spending some time looking into the gender question, because this developmental imagination, as espoused by the traditionalist groups of Kerala Muslims, is happening in a much larger context of secular democratic context of Kerala, that of wider context of India. So it is this imagination also brings in its own contradictions and contestations and problems, and I believe the questions of gender question is a very important prism which really helps us to understand quite a lot of contestations and internal contradictions in these developmental imaginations. Now let me take you to the context, the Kerala story. As you can see, this is the southwest state of India in the Indian peninsula, and it's a multi-religious composition, very kind of very unique composition compared to many other states in India. It has 34.6 million people, with comprising of 54.73% of Hindus, 26.53% of Muslims, and 18.38% of Christians. And Kerala has a long history of relatively peaceful coexistence of religious communities. All these religious Hindus, Christians, and Christianity and Islam reached Kerala shores much earlier. And it has been seen as a kind of a unique form of coexistence in India. There have been literature about Kerala exceptionalism, why and how Kerala maintains a relatively peaceful coexistence among many, compared to many other places, characterized by less incidences of communal violence and tension. So there have been quite a lot of interesting works on that. And one of the very important works by Ashutosh Varshney talks about, he argues that it is the civic relations, the quality of civic relations that maintain this kind of a relationship. And Kerala is also known for its communist influence. And Kerala is one of the first places in the whole world where a communist party came into power through elections in 1954. And even now, it is a communist party which is ruling the state. So that is something important. And the state is also known for a series of socio-religious reforms in the 19th and 20th century, which is also kind of widely being talked about. And another point where Kerala has been discussed quite extensively in the academic circles is about this Kerala model of development. I'm sure that many of you must be familiar with this. It's a very unique developmental trajectory where very high human development indices were achieved with a very low per capita income. So that was seen as a very unique model, connected with the Kerala specific historic trajectory and other things. Now, let me talk about the Muslims in Kerala, specifically the Mapla Muslims who reside mostly in the southern part of the state. And as I mentioned, they are one of the oldest Muslim communities in South Asia who reached the Kerala shores as a part of the sea trade between Arabia and Kerala for spice trade. As Kerala was one of the very important exporters of spices to several parts of the globe. And their integration into the Kerala population or Kerala society was very peaceful through intermarriage between Arabs and native women, and also through the influence of Sufi saints, large-scale conversions happened. But the arrival of Portuguese in the 15th century, it changed the whole dynamics, and it led to, and there were a series of violent incidents between Portuguese and the Muslims for the dominance of the sea trade. And that also continued during the colonial period by the British. There were a series of violent incidents and conflicts between Kerala Muslims and the British rulers in the 19th and 20th century, which culminated in 1921, which is widely studied as this Mapla Rebellion, which saw the massacre of hundreds of Kerala Muslims, and it also had a kind of an religious angle. So that also has been kind of studied extensively. But this particular incident of 1921 Malabar Rebellion was also the time which provided a kind of a reformist movement from the community to emerge, and a more organized, the Salafi-inspired Mujahid movement emerged in the mid-1920s in Kerala, called as Nahdlatul Ulama. And there was also a Sunni traditionalist opposition to that. The Samasta Kerala Jamiatul Ulama was also formulated during that particular time. So from 1920 onwards, you see very modern kind of organizations emerge within the community, espousing different kind of theological positions. So this reformists, that is heavily influenced by Salafi orientations from Egypt and from Saudi Arabia, they presented themselves as the reformists, and they put forward a very comprehensive reformist agenda, reforming the theological, religious dimensions of the Muslim life in Kerala, and also talking about a host of reform in terms of the social and cultural life of these people. So they emphasized a rationalist, scripturalist understanding of Islam. They believe that the only authentic source of Islam is our Quran and Hadith. So all other later jurists and others were kind of dismissed, and a host of worship patterns and belief systems were kind of deemed as un-Islamic or impure. And at the same time, they also put forward, they advocated for modern secular education, and they advocated for women's education. So they presented themselves as a kind of a modern, Muslims. So the reformists were seen, or they presented themselves, or they are widely seen as the modern Muslims of Kerala, because they spoke the language of modernity about women's education, women's entry into the mosque, and a host of other things. And incidentally, they are the people who came from the upper strata of the community. They were from the middle class, upper middle class group, whereas the traditional Sunnis mostly from the lower class sections. And the Mujahid movement as a part of a wider currents of social reform movements in modern Kerala. As I mentioned, the ideological or theological influence came from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, but that had a very specific, reformulation in Kerala. The kind of Islamic reformism that emerged in Kerala was very specifically, Kerala specific, and it was also influenced by a host of other kind of reformist movements that were happening in Hinduism during the particular time. And this effort to redefine, to reform Islam was very heavily contested by the traditionalists. And so they were presented, the traditionalist Sunnis, were presented as conservative, orthodox, and the anti-modern other of the Islamic reforms. So this has been the story which was presented, which was understood, which was propagated, which was taken, which was presented in the kind of a common sense. And what we are seeing, or what we are going to discuss, is a very interesting transformation of this scenario since the 1980s and 1990s, more prominently from 1990s. So we see an era of more assertive Islamism, assertive traditionalism from 1990s. What we call it as a Islamic neo-traditionalism in Kerala, the kind of an assertive phase. So this is the phase in which I will be spending some time trying to explain the kind of theological reinventions or theological reformulations that happened. Of course, this happened in a larger structural context of economic transformations and other things. So one of the important things that they argued, that they reasserted the centrality of traditional Islamic knowledge, transition. For example, they re-emphasized the role of taqlid, which was subjected to extreme criticism by the reformers, because they argued that taqlid is a blind following, that you are simply following your ulema without actually even understanding what the Quran says. Whereas here they stood by this taqlid, that is the accusation of and dissemination of Islamic knowledge through adherence to one of the four schools of law. Here it is the Shafi madhab. And the Islamic spirituality, Sufism, they stood by that. They asserted the centrality of Sufism in Islam, and they asserted the importance of learning directly from the ulema, because in the reformist discourses, a learner is supposed to use your rationality, your individual rationality, to read and understand Quran. Whereas here they argued that that is not possible, whereas it has a specific methodology of understanding and interpreting Islam, and that has to be transmitted through a chain of ulema who have been who are connected back to Prophet Muhammad and the Islamic tradition of ethics. So they talked about an Islamic religiosity which is centered around other. And also importance or insistence on a host of ritual performances. So there is an importance given to embodiment of devotional love towards Prophet and the bodily cultivation of piety in constituting the traditional Islamic habitus. So Prophet Muhammad is seen and is adored and loved, and that was seen as a very important mark of Muslim religiosity, which was again kind of criticized by the reformists. And legitimizing the traditional ritual performances, which were condemned by for example, the shrine worships, what is known as the nurchas in Malayalam, where the Sufi shrines, the annual festivals, these were condemned by the reformists, but here they say that these are integral part of our religiosity. Now, this kind of theological reformulation also was heavily accompanied by very interesting ideological and theoretical critique of reformism. The traditionalists argued that the Islamic reformism is inspired by Western rationalism because you are using rationality to understand and explain Islam, and that is heavily problematic. So Islamic reformism was inspired by Western rationalism that eliminated the pluralistic articulations of the traditional Islamic faith. So basically, the argument is that using rationality or using reason alone to understand Islam is a very, very limited way of understanding Islam, and it is incapable of understanding the pluralistic world in which traditional Islam originated and then survived and then flourished in many other places. And they also argued that the reformism is promoting a kind of a very dry Islam, okay, which is disembedded from its local cultural moorings. So reformism would present an Islam that would look similar everywhere across the globe. And traditionalists argued that that is not how Islam kind of spread and then made its impact in different places. You need to understand Islam, while understanding its universal character also need to be seen how it is connected to its specific historical locations. So that emerged as a very ingenious post-colonial critique, very, very fascinating set of criticism. Now, along with this criticism, what they did was they tried to link this Kerala-specific religiosity with similar places across the globe. Okay, so there were attempts to create connections and linkages with Kerala and to a host of other Muslim societies across the globe, and to say that what they have been practicing in Kerala is quite authentic. So there's a linking traditional Islamic practices with similar ones across the globe to demonstrate Kerala as a part of a larger authentic Islamic world. Now, so this has been identified, been studied by scholars. So many people call it different names. Selby calls it as neo-traditionalist Islam, and it's being called as late Sunni traditionalism, traditional Islam current, traditional Islam network, and anti-Salafi international. So these scholars have identified this as a more recent trends in many of the Muslim societies in a post-Islamist era. So the kind of a Muslim activism which was characterized by Islamist or political Islamist phase, many argue that that is kind of it has reached its peak and it's withdrawing. And what you are seeing is that in many Muslim societies, this new traditionalism or neo-traditionalism is on the rise. Now, so what happens here is this neo-traditionalist articulations entail a reconfiguration of authorizing discourses, cultural practices, and modes of socio-political and economic engagements of Kerala Muslims. So it involves everything. It has a it has a new theological rearticulation. It has a new authorizing discourses. It talks about cultural practices and a host of other things. And as I mentioned earlier, this has to be seen in the background of large-scale Gulf migration from Kerala to Gulf countries from 1980s onwards, and the significance of remittance from that. And that provided the possibilities for large-scale economic mobility and economic prosperity. So this what is the connection, or what is the relevance of all these transformations with their developmental trajectory or their developmental imagination? So they begin to develop kind of developmental imaginations beyond nation state. So far, if most of their developmental imaginations were presented as a result of an engagement or bargaining with the state, in a more renewed manner, they are talking about going beyond the state and talking the language of self-reliance and entrepreneurialism and community empowerment. So these transformations, they transcend the local, national, and global frames of reference with implications within the community and beyond. So the traditional Kerala Islam is also seen as connected with similar kind of Islamic societies across, and the new possibilities of globalization and other things are offering them the possibilities to connect with each of these communities. Now, some of these important ways in which these expansions happened, or this new forays into development happened, was through the establishment of education institutions which impart integrated education. So this integrated education is a combination of secular education along with that of religious education. And again, this is not something new. The reformists have been doing it for a long time. But here, there is a renewed interest, or there is a renewed attempt by the traditionalists to embrace this particular model, to which they have been, very, very reluctant to do for a long time. And here, they try to create a class of turbaned professionals. And this term is very important. This term appears very often in their articulations. It's a class of turbaned professionals, and invariably it's all male, because they talk about turban, and there's absolutely no mentioning about the women being emerging as professionals and being able to lead the community to the future. I'll come back to that point later. So a group of Sunni scholars molded in traditionalist Islamic orientations, but also excel in various modern professions. So this has been a major emphasis of this discourse for the last couple of decades. So they're talking about a group of scholars who are very well established and who are nurtured within the specific theological orientations of this neo-traditionalism, but also have excelled in other professional forms, in medicine or engineering or in architecture or in, you name it, in everything. So a host of students began to go to different education institutions across the country, and they begin to get this secular education, but they also are seen as rooted in this theological tradition. So these turban professionals are seen as the key drivers of communities' forays into neoliberal economy and entrepreneurship. So they are seen as the people who take the community to the fore. So there's heightened focus on self-reliance, private capital, and entrepreneurship within the moral economy of traditionalist Islam. So this is something important, because you see that language of self-reliance, because the community must be able to help itself. The help from the state government could be limited. Of course, they would depend on that. But beyond that, a sense of empowerment for the community is seen as something significant. Private capital is seen as something significant, and entrepreneurship is promoted to a large extent. But all within a moral economy of this traditionalist Islam. And they always make a distinction between the traditionalist Islamic value orientations with that of the others, even within the Islam itself. So this community building based on exclusive theological orientations within Islam. So there are actually two factions within this traditionalist groups, and one of them is seen as more exclusive in terms of their community building, and they would even talk about nurturing their own community within Kerala Muslims as opposed to other traditionalists. So there is a strong sense of exclusive theological orientations within Islam, and there is also very interesting demonstrations of conspicuous consumption and display of class mobility. You see these people using extremely high-end luxurious cars. So that display of the wealth and luxury is something very evident. It's also a demonstration of the prosperity of at least of that particular group. It's also a statement that they have made considerable economic progress and they have arrived. And this is a picture from the convocation ceremony of Marcus, one of the one of the education institutions. And if you look into the website, you will see similar kind of photos with kind of uniform kind of headgear, uniform appearances. So this is a typical turbaned professional. Now, this is a poster or an installation of a university, Darul Huda University, established in 1986, but later it became a university later. And it has 25 campuses within Kerala, all privately owned. And outside Kerala, there are 8, and there are 2 women campuses. And this is a list of universities that the Darul Huda University has academic tie-up with. There's a long list of, it has affiliated, it's recognized by Al-Azhar University of Cairo, Egypt, and it has MOU signed with universities in Libya, in Malaysia, in Iran, and in Tunisia. And there is another education institution, Marcus, which is run by the other faction, which they also have a variety of MOU signed with other universities in Egypt and Turkey and Jordan, UAE, Tunisia, and other things. So a remarkable educational advancement through private capital and entrepreneurship has been happening for the last couple of decades, at least last 2 decades. And let me take you to another interesting site of this developmental imagination. I'm going to talk about this Marcus Knowledge City. It is seen as a flagship project of a neo-traditionalist group, which is considered to be highly conservative and orthodox. So among the 2 factions, this particular faction is considered to be more orthodox and more conservative, but they have come up with this project, a very, very fascinating project. So that's how they introduced this particular project. An integrated township providing infrastructure for high-class academic institutions, residential facilities, health and hospitality facilities, recreation and leisure facilities, and commercial facilities intended to promote the city as a center of international excellence. An integrated township for learning, living, and leisure. And this is how it is envisaged. It's a digital illustration. This is situated some 40 kilometers from Calicut city. They bought a large amount of land in a rural setting, and this city is kind of being established now. So it has this huge mosque in the beginning, in the middle, which they call it as the cultural center. And this is the way they kind of present it. The big is spiritual, the big is symbolic. It says India's biggest cultural center will be home to a spiritual enclave that features a 38-meter high central dome, which is the biggest of its kind in India. So that is the way in which it is presented. And it also, this township also has a lot of education institutions, residential areas, College of Pharmacy, College of Unani, College of Nursing, and a host of other institutions. And these are some of the excerpts from their website, which will give you some idea about the kind of developmental imaginations, the way in which they understand the community's progress. So over the past few decades, the global economy has shifted from being manufacturing-centric to knowledge-driven one. This is an era of privatization and globalization of Indian higher education. Success in leveraging knowledge and innovation that could contribute to high-tech manufacturing and high-value added services only possible with a sound infrastructure of higher education. The Marcus Knowledge City campus is a self-sustained educational hub providing world-class education from preschool level to postgraduate courses. There's one more excerpt. And this is their corporate tower, M Tower, corporate signature of Marcus Knowledge Center, with 16-floor building comprising of office spaces, premium 1 BHK, 2 BHK service apartments, an infinity pool. It has multi-layered service apartments that can accommodate offices, workshop, workstations, and everything. So to furnish better hospitality for the corporate world, be it early startups or established ones. And this is a functioning hotel, Fessin Hotel, 60 plus deluxe rooms, plus 30 suites, a business desk. It has a swimming pool, almost every facility. And as you can see that it is strategically situated in the foothills of Wayanad. Wayanad is a very major tourist attraction in Kerala. So the location of this hotel is promoted as a very convenient one to serve the tourists of the region. So Fezin provides an easy access to premier tourist destinations of Wayanad and commercial centers of Kozhikode. So this again would display the kind of internal tensions. On the one hand, it is established by a traditional religious group. On the other hand, it is also supposed to attract to the kind of wider touristic sensibilities and other things. And they would establish a souk with all which are characteristic of almost every major Muslim cities in the world. And it also comes with a landmark village, a set of apartment complexes with would provide an ideal Islamic atmosphere with all these facilities. An ideal choice for those seeking a vibrancy of integrated township in the form of elite education institutions, medical establishment, recreational facilities, and 40+ amenities, luxurious amenities like clubhouse, swimming pool, multi-gym. So all these things. Now, what does this particular flagship project tell us? Now, I would suggest that it effectively combines the religious discourses of true Islamic knowledge with neoliberal notions of entrepreneurship, private financial investments, and development. So this is the most visible form that is evident here. And these economic initiatives are seen as integral to Islamic development project, and it constitutes an economically productive, pious Islamic subject. So an Islamic subject is seen as economically productive. Economically, it's seen as entrepreneurial in its orientation and is capable of taking the community also forward. And the specific forms of neoliberal subject formation where theological religious affiliation and commitment function as a mobilization force for neoliberal economy and entrepreneurialism. So this is something again interesting because usually neoliberalism is understood as something that promotes an autonomous individual, and an individual who is self-centered, who uses his rationality to maximize his economic goal. But here, the emphasis is not on the autonomous individual, but an individual who is part of the story, supposedly highly committed to this particular theological orientation and be part of this group. And so that affiliation and commitment to this theological religious group is seen as this mobilization force for this neoliberal economy. At least that's how they present the growth. And attempts also to create an exclusive moral economy based on specific theological orientations of this of this group. So all the people who are involved in these projects, people who are part of this conception, everything are seen being part of this larger group. So that group identity, that theological commitment is something significant. Now, again, there are works which suggest the similar kind of processes. Rutinjik talks about spiritual economies and market Islam he studied in Malaysia. Mona Atlia talks about pious neoliberalism in her study of Egypt, and Benjamin Soares talks about structural adjustment Islam in Mali. So there are similar studies which talk about the kind of interesting transformation of Muslim communities and their engagement with the neoliberalism. So in an introduction written by Osel and Rudnijik in 2017, presents it in a very interesting manner, that specific forms of material exchange and economic engagement are not only central to objectification of religious experience and piety, but becomes also the means through which to imagine and experience novel forms of religiousity and religious organization. So I believe that the case that we've been presenting here has a lot to have a kind of to engage with this literature and then to go into more its specificities. Now, let me also take you to another dimension of this developmental imagination of this group. It's about the political negotiation with the group. Yeah. So they have been known as presenting a kind of a communitarian identity politics as opposed to a communalist politics. There are scholars who talk about it. And the traditionalist Muslims have been taking very strong positions against radical and militant tendencies within the community. There were instances of some Muslim youth joining the ISIS, but the traditionalist groups they initiated a statewide campaign against it. They have been seen as strong opposites to political Islamists, so they never agreed to this idea of nurturing political ambitions. and attempts to reassert virtues of communal harmony, reiteration of peaceful coexistence, and religious peace. So there are also interesting reassertions of cultural roots and belongingness to the country, and novel forms of citizenship claims, and especially beyond the constitutional morality, because those who are following the developments in India, you would know that there was a controversial bill introduced to reformulate the people who come from other countries. And so there was opposition against it. And there's a reiteration of nationalism and non-confrontationist approach to the rulers, those who are in power. And is also seen as a kind of political poetism, characteristic of Islamic neo-traditionalist movements elsewhere. Now, let me come to the final section, where the developmental imaginations and its fault lines, the gender question. Now, as we have seen in the posters of the urban professionals, or in every publication, it is overwhelming predominance of a masculine phase of Islamic development, conspicuous by the absence of women in their narratives and discourses, and refusal to engage with questions of gender equality and women's political participation, unlike the reformists. So within the reformist discourses, you have very visible specific arguments and discourses about gender empowerment, or the whole question of gender question within an Islamic framework. And it very, very interestingly, it engages with secular feminism or different forms of feminism. But there is a discourse available within the reformist circle about what is the whole, how do they engage with the women's question. But that is completely absent in the traditionalist discourse. They refuse to have an engagement with the whole question of gender question. And there have been series of instances of misogynist, male chauvinist utterances against Muslim women's public roles and political participation by the traditionalist leadership. There have been series of very, very outlandish statements and instances where Muslim girls were insulted on the stage because they dared to come up on invitation. So there was series of statements made by some of the very important leaders which emphasize on gender segregation and an unequal position of women. And it appears as if it's a kind of a performance to reiterate their traditionalist position and the status of the ulama, because gender segregation, gender discrimination is seen as one of the very important, important aspects around which their traditionalist position has been reaffirmed and positioned. At the same time, there have been a recent opening of integrated educations, but they are still confined to the kind of soft subjects and aimed at creating educated and religious housewives. So again, being studied extensively elsewhere. And there are also internal tensions and conflicts within the traditional clergy regarding the increasing focus of some education institutions on women's education and empowerment. Because some of these education institutions within the traditions are seen as promoting women's education, and there are kind of criticisms against that. Or in other words, women empowerment in the liberal sense is seen as the perils of liberal and Western influence. Now, this is a kind of a discourse that is happening at the top level. But interestingly, despite the ulama rhetoric against women empowerment, impressive education and political advancement of Muslim women is seen in the last several decades. And this again has to be understood in the larger context of an imperative of secular modernity in which this community is situated. It's in Kerala, it's in India, it's a liberal secular democracy. There are state interventions very, very significantly. And there is also increasing role of this Gulf remittance as a driving force, because a host of families used the Gulf money they invested in the education of their children, and that education has made significant role changes and involvement of Muslim women in local self-governance and public activities. And now India has a mandate that 33% of the seats have to be reserved for women in the local self-government institutions. So that has mandated that Muslim women in Muslim majority areas will have to stand for elections, and that has brought a lot of women in general and Muslim women in particular into the fore. And it also have been influenced by a host of secular feminist and Islamic feminist influences, because it is a very vibrant public sphere. And also exposure to cultural globalization and wider acceptance of debates on gender equality, sexuality, and a host of other liberal ideas. Though it has not been documented, though they are not in a very, very visible form, there's been a huge exposure to this kind of debates, and the youth are kind of quite open to that, or are exposed to that. And this just, I'm ending with two pictures. These two posters are taken some 10 years back, and these are election campaign materials. And the two men that you see in these posters are actually not the candidates, but their wives are the candidates. Okay, their wives' photo cannot be printed in the poster, so they are replaced by their husbands. And this is a more recent photo where you see the actual women candidates present themselves in the poster. So I'm just using these two photos to indicate the kind of large-scale changes that happened in the last 10 to 15 years. And this again, on the one hand, you have a lady representing one particular coalition. On the other side, you have another lady representing the opposite party. So let me conclude. Development trajectories and aspirations heavily intertwined by the religious and specific theological orientations. Not a novel argument, but it's extremely important to examine these implications of this argument in very specific context. And neo-traditionalist Islam charting ingenious ways to engage with globalization and neoliberal economic development, as I mentioned. It also is accompanied by very interesting reformulation of its theological positions and assertive traditionalism, and very ingenious ways to engage with globalization and neoliberal economic development. And in that process, Islamic religiosity and neoliberal subjectivity gets shaped the kind of a mutual constitution of the economy and the religion as an important one. And at the same time, the neo-traditionalist development imaginations encounter with liberal secular society and the emerging contestations and contradictions, because as these imaginations are unfolding in a very different context, and then that brings in the kind of internal contradictions and contestations. And as I mentioned, gender offers a very, very interesting place to look into that. So these are the conclusions, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Santhosh. Excellent presentation. As people gather their thoughts to ask questions. I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, I wanted to sort of specify one thing that perhaps didn't come up very clearly in your presentation because you had to do a lot, but maybe for the audience is important. The first thing that, the sort of issues that Santhosh has talked about perhaps are very different in the context of a Muslim majority state or context. In the particular context of India or Kerala, where Muslims are a minority, the spaces within the states have to be cut up, and they're continuously up to discussion. And also what is particular here in what Santhosh was talking about is the fact that it was referring to particular religious organizations within the Muslim community. A religious organization which until 30 years ago would not allow their members to learn English. So that has been or to engage with so-called Western education or scientific science. So is a sort of spectacular change which has taken place in the last 30 years within these religious organizations and their orientation towards the development of the community as a whole. So my question was how, these type of developments which are envisaged by this organization, they do tend, or they directed towards making the community more self-reliant, wealthier, and to provide services, of course, for the community. But also, are exclusive. They're creating a situation of exclusivity. I mean, in one of the slides that you were presenting, this education institution suggested that, you can study here from lower kindergarten to PhD.
Yeah.
That means you never meet anyone else outside the community.
Yeah.
So what does it mean then in the context of Kerala pluralism and Kerala secular orientation? That over the years has addressed the whole issue of development from the perspective of class rather than from the perspective of religious communities.
Yeah, thank you, Filippo. This is a very important question, because it's also talks about the larger transformations that is happening in the last 30, 40 years, especially with the emergence of private education institutions by caste communities and by religious communities. And ever since education was open to private sector, private schools and colleges have been established. Quite a lot of them are self-finance mode, which don't get any financial help from the state. So most of these things are education institutions are established by caste groups or religious groups, and they tend to be exclusive in its nature, because they have their management is very, very exclusive. They have a kind of complete control over its management. But these institutions, since they offer an integrated education combining the modern secular education along with Islamic studies, tend to be more exclusive, because it's also envisioned as a space, as a educational space for Muslim children. And so as you mentioned, from the kindergarten to post-graduation and PhD, there's possibility that they grow up, and that is precisely the aim is. That's precisely the aim is. And even those children, those students who move from these institutions and go to other, say, central universities and other places are also expected to be, continue to be having the kind of a similar religious orientation and similar theological affiliations and commitment. That is precisely the expectations, and they have, different mechanisms to ensure that, mechanisms of employment of a host of other kind of networks. Youth organization, students organization, other kind of. So there are different mechanisms in place to maintain that network and that affiliation and other. And what it offers to the kind of a larger plural future of Kerala is an important question, because definitely this diminishes the possibility of interaction with other places, the kind of a typical secular, public space that as you would imagine would be definitely impacted by this. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm PhD student here at Centre on the Middle East, so it's really really interesting to hear your research. Thank you. I'm not sure there's a microphone. I can speak louder, but that's easier. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure. I can hear you.
So much. I was curious if it's okay to ask around some mentioning of religious organisation, and it links to Filippo's point. I'm wondering whether or not how such projects or development projects that you're presenting relates to potential religious marginalization, or you refer to kind of through Islamic knowledge, but essentially in a way of kind of religious homogeneity.
Yeah.
And therefore how it has been conceived both within the community that you're presenting, and also the surrounding kind of geographic location that you're also presenting would be helpful to know. Thank you very much.
Okay. See, the religious public sphere of Kerala has been very, very active in terms of the claims and counterclaims regarding what constitutes the true Islam. Okay. So there are numerous organizations, but if you divide them broadly, there are these traditionalist Sunnis, those who they form the majority, maybe around 80 to 90% of the people. Then maybe around 10 to 15% of people who belong to the Salafi Mujahid movement, and then very small minority of people, but very vocal people who are the Jamaat Islam. Okay, so these are the three major groups. And for the last several decades, the kind of contestations among them have been very, very loud and very shrill. Okay, but now it's almost kind of looks like they are kind of settled, because now the differences have been laid very well. Now, at least for the organizational matters, they are seen as 3 or 4 different separate theological groups within that. And within the traditional group, there are 2 groups. One is both are named after their founders. One is known as this AP group. The other one is known as this EK group. So they all have their own set of mosques, their own set of madrasas, their own set of institutions. So there's a kind of complete division has permeated down to the grassroots level. So there is in that sense the community is fragmented from the top to the bottom level in terms of organizing. So a child who is born in a AP Sunni family should go to a madrasa that belongs to, which is run by this particular group. They can't go to the other place. So it creates a sense of exclusivity, intra-community conversations, but at the same time there's an overarching identity of being a Muslim, and in the present scenario, so that political identity is becoming very, very important. It plays a very important role. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So regarding this, earlier in the presentation, you mentioned like criticism made by the traditionalists of
Yeah.
reformists that
Yeah.
they want to create a similar Islam everywhere.
Yeah.
They don't take into the local context.
Yeah.
And the traditionalists, we take the local context.
Yeah.
So what does it say about the idea of state?
Idea of state.
Idea of state, because reformists in a way are being criticized as globalists.
Mm-hmm.
Because they want a unified ulama or not ulama but ummah.
Mm-hmm.
But similar looking Islam everywhere.
Yeah.
Traditionalists are saying we take the local context. We are the ones who Islam is local. And then the new traditionalists are in a way globalists because of the neoliberal law.
Yeah.
So how does this idea of state come into play? You can talk a bit about that, because I see the tension between reformists being global ummah and traditionalists being, we are the ones who look into the local context.
Yeah.
So that's one point. The second point is about the role of the Sharia law, because you talk about moral economy and how does Sharia law come into play? Because there's the idea that Sharia law could be beyond state, could be non-state. So how do neo-traditionalists take into account Sharia law? They are projecting these images.
Yeah. This is an interesting question because the major criticism of the traditionalists have been that the reformists are encouraging a scripturalist reading of Quran, and they are against a host of customs and rituals that are specific to the kind of a cultural context. So they criticize Islam as a very dry one, which is very insensitive to the local and cultural one. So this has been one of the very important forms of their criticism. So they understand that the Kerala Islam is a part of a larger Islamic world, and that is why this term Islamicate is something important. Okay, so they're not talking about that's again there are very interesting arguments about how that imagination of being a local is also part of a larger Islamicate one, where the cultural things could be different. While they being united by the theological and religious orientation, the cultural thing is relevant, and that's a huge debate within sociology of Islam. So they are there's no very specific imagination about them being. Of course, there is an understanding as being a part of a larger ummah, but it's not being seen as an important agenda to pursue. Maybe in opposition to a host of political Islamist imaginations of having to capture the state power and then so that is not the case. And here as well they defend their their unique position by talking about how peaceful the Islam's integration into Kerala society has been and how peaceful their relations with fellow Hindus have been. So that particular thing has to be nurtured and encouraged is the argument. And this argument was again made to the fore when there were cases of some people joining from Kerala to ISIS, and there was some very extremist propaganda by from some French groups of this reformist groups about being a very exclusive kind of a community. So that was criticized by this group by saying that you have to be sensitive to the history of the land. And the second one about Sharia law. See, in India, the criminal laws are modern laws, whereas the personal laws are governed by the individual community's law. And so that has been a kind of an agreement that has been, that almost every religious group has been happy about it. But now there is this talk about implementing a uniform civil code. Okay, it's on the card, and that has the potential to create a lot of discontentment and anger among different groups, because as of now, there's no clarity about what it would mean. Okay, because that would be seen as a major infringement on the rights of Muslims to practice the personal law, the Sharia law in their personal life. But as of now, except this, there's hardly any discussion about following Sharia law, because personal laws are community-based laws, whereas the criminal laws are common laws. Yeah. I think she has a question.
This was covered in the beginning, but does the claiming of space and in terms of development and every other thing, does this translate to the national context also, or from your understanding, is it very limited to the state itself and the people of the state?
Yeah, I think it is not something. See, the Muslim situation in Kerala is very unique in terms of the history, in terms of the number of population and the kind of economic mobility that it has able to achieve over the last years. So I will not say that it's a national phenomenon. It is more specific to Kerala, and that is why they almost every organization is opening up education institutions in other parts of the country, where which in a more socially and economically underdeveloped regions. All these institutions are opening up new education institutions, because their socio-economic situation is seen as very, very, very different. So this is more of a unique story of Kerala Muslims. Of course, there are more maybe very upper class entrepreneurial Muslims in other places, but a more organized way of this I don't think that you will find in many other places, at least as of my understanding.
Said someone had raised that hand. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Any more questions? No more questions. So the next one, chat. Oh, it's been bad for a while. Oh, that was mine. Yeah. So yes, thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's been here and online. It was nice to see some faces that I haven't seen for a while. So very nice. And to everyone, see you in the new year for another 3 development lectures, which will take place probably in the same room.
Yeah, or ideas.
Or ideas.
Or ideas, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, people. Thank you.
Thank you, Santhosh.
Thank you.